non-sugar sweeteners don't have the negative impact on teeth, and actually some of them even have a beneficial impact. So we know that some of the things like xylitol, for example, can actually be beneficial for teeth. They help with the remineralization of the enamel.
Welcome to the BSDA podcast series, episode 1, The Sweet Taste of Balance. Everything you need to know about non-sugar sweeteners. My name is Dr Idrees Mughal, and I'm here with Juliette Kellow. Hello, welcome.
Hello there.
Good, nice to see you. So please tell me, just before we jump into what all the fuss is about, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Juliette Kellow and I'm a registered dietitian. And I do a lot of work with the media, do a lot of work writing for newspapers and magazines, also giving quotes to journalists and working with companies to help them dispel some of the myths that we actually have around nutrition. And so one of the jobs that I'm doing is working with British Soft Drinks on their non-nutritive sweeteners to really help, bust some myths, really.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's what this series is all about. So I think to start with, it's probably a good idea to just mention, what are non-sugar sweeteners in general, and we can go perhaps through some different types that people might be aware of.
Yeah, sure. So non-sugar sweeteners are, as the name suggests, they're sweeteners which contain no sugar at all. And sometimes they come under different names, artificial sweeteners. Sometimes we just refer them to them as sweeteners, sometimes non-nutritive sweeteners. So we have lots of different names, but basically they sweeten food, but they don't add any sugar to it. And we have 11 which are actually approved for use within the UK and within Europe. So some of them are names that we'll be very familiar with, things like aspartame, for example, sucralose. We also have saccharin, and then we have stevia, which tends to be promoted as being more of a kind of a natural plant-based type of sweetener. So that's really what sweeteners are all about.
Yeah, no, great. I've heard a lot of people mention, stevia is much better than, sugar, and we've also been seeing lots in the media recently about, the demonization of non-sugar sweeteners. So what do you think is the role or the utility for non-sugar sweeteners in the diet today?
Well, they're really there to sweeten food and mean that we don't need to actually add sugar to food, and we can help to manage our sugar intake. So there's nothing wrong with sugar. There's so much written about sugar, lots spoken about sugar, and not necessarily all of it is based on evidence and science. But we do know that in the UK, many of us are having far more sugar than we actually should in our diet. So typical intakes in the UK for an adult are around about 50 grams. That's between 12 and 13 teaspoons of sugar as you would have in your tea or your coffee or sugar cubes.
Yeah.
And we really shouldn't be having more than 7 teaspoons, just 30 grams. So the non-sugar sweetener's role is really to help us manage our sugar intake. And there's lots of good reasons why we do need to manage our sugar intake.
No, excellent point. As you said, in the kind of Western dietary pattern, UK and US, for example, refined or excess sugars are just found within lots of different foods that we buy normal day-to-day life, right? So I think people might not be realizing that they're consuming too many refined or excess sugar. And of course, as with everything, there is the importance of balance and the importance of moderation with all things. But I think when something can go a bit too excessive and they're found in lots of different types of food, that's where I think, the role of non-sugar sweeteners can be very, very useful. So you mentioned, some of the possible benefits in replacing, refined sugars. What do you think? Could you just generalize, some of the additional benefits and what potential outcomes we might see from using more non-sugar sweeteners as opposed to the full refined sugars?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, there's lots of information out there on sugar and not all of it is based on evidence. But we do have this fabulous document, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition have got a 350 plus page document on the role of carbohydrates in our diet. And of course, sugars are one of those carbohydrates. We go back to our school days and we often learn to them as being simple sugars because they break down in the body really quite easily. Now, sugars, we know from this Scientific Advisory Committee Nutrition report, and this is based on a group of kind of, experts in their field, independent experts on nutrition. And the report found that there are kind of like a couple of key things which high intakes of sugar are linked to. Now, perhaps no surprises, the first one is tooth decay and have an impact on our dental health. So we know that 1 in 3 people in the UK have signs, or adults have signs of dental decay. And we know that one of the roles of sugar is it's the frequency of sugar that can actually increase tooth decay.
Yeah.
Secondly, we know that high intakes of sugar are linked to high intakes of calories, and too many calories over time can result in an increase in weight. So we have more and more people who are living with overweight, living with obesity. We have around about 2/3 of the population at the moment. We also know that specifically with sugary drinks, that high intakes of sugary drinks are linked to a higher increased risk of type 2 diabetes, of which we have more than 5 million people within the UK. And also the sugary drinks are also linked to higher weights and body mass index gains in young people, in children and in teenagers. So when you look at all of the roles that sugar has, sugar is fine in moderation, but too much is linked to these conditions. And that's really where the non-sugar sweeteners can actually have benefits, where we can manage our sugar intake by incorporating non-sugar sweeteners into our diet.
No, fantastic overview of the benefits of the substitution, as I like to say. Have you had much kind of direct exposure to a lot of do you use a lot of non-sugar sweeteners in your normal day to day?
Well, I don't have a massively sweet tooth, but I do like soft drinks from time to time. And I tend not to drink very much alcohol, so soft drinks are a really good option if you're not drinking lots of alcohol. And of course, I usually choose the ones which have got non-sugar sweeteners because I'm concerned about keeping my teeth healthy. In particular, we know that actually non-sugar sweeteners don't have the negative impact on teeth, and actually some of them even have a beneficial impact. So we know that some of the things like xylitol, for example, can actually be beneficial for teeth. They help with the remineralization of the enamel. So that's a really positive thing.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Really positive. Whereas sugar, on the other hand, is what kind of with the bacteria in our mouth go to work on the sugar and break it down and create acids. And it's the acids which then go on to eventually create holes and cavities which then need to be filled.
Yeah, I don't think many people might be aware of some might even have potential benefits for oral health and oral outcomes.
Absolutely. So I think, having kind of like, the soft drinks with the no sugar sweeteners is definitely a good move. And of course, in an ideal world, we'd all be drinking water, but that's not practical, is it? And not realistic for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, no, I think with my own personal journey experience, I have a massive sweet tooth. And I remember, all through school, I used to, after school have 3 to 4 times a week, go out for hot desserts, ice cream, cookie dough, waffles, all this kind of stuff. And since I started incorporating, non-sugar sweeteners into my diet, I love kind of the low calorie, concentrated drinks that you add to water, like squash, right? And I consume those every single day. And I found myself that the urge for, sugary drinks or snacks or desserts has just completely diminished in myself. And, I think that people that have a major sweet tooth like myself could really benefit by trying to find one that they might not like. Some people don't like the aftertaste of some of the non-sugar sweeteners, but I think that I've tried with several of my patients and clients that when you actually spend a bit of effort trying to find one that you really do like the taste of, then it just has a massively positive impact on lots of other kind of lifestyle habits in your day. So you might not be going in the evening and trying to find that sweet snack after a meal, or having a little kind of indulgence in lots of your kind of favorite treats and things. So I think that role for those who love a good sweet treat it's just massively beneficial, obviously not just for oral health, but as you've mentioned, for the increase in weight over time, over many years, also increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So for myself personally, they've served a really important role in my life. I find myself not having the need or desire for really hypercaloric or rich calorie dense sweet treats anymore. So I think this side of the conversation needs to be kind of elaborated on more, in the fact that the substitution of full sugars with non-sugar sweeteners can really serve the general population, massively over the course of many years.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because what we find is that there are lots of different flavour profiles and levels of sweetness. So we have these 11 approved sweeteners for use in the UK and Europe. And we know that they all have slightly different flavour profiles. So finding
Aftertaste.
one, so the aftertaste, and finding one that you actually like. And I think it's also important to mention that lots of different products have a mixture of sweeteners in. They don't just contain one sweetener, they have a blend of different sweeteners. So it's really about experimenting. Some can be used in cooking, some are better for kind of like sprinkling onto, say, porridge, for example, or hot drinks. Some are automatically in the foods that we purchase. So things like yogurts, for example, come with sweeteners added into them. So there's a wide variety of products out there, and it's really about finding one that you particularly like, or a blend that you like.
Yeah, amazing. Now that we've kind of touched on some of the potential benefits over time, I myself have been aware, in the science communication space over the last year, especially, there's been a lot of controversy around many of the, non-sugar sweeteners and sugar alcohols as well. I'll just like to ask you, why do you think there's been a massive increase in the kind of skepticism surrounding, non-sugar sweeteners to begin with?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question, and you're absolutely right. We've seen lots of news in recent times looking at kind of like the safety of non-sugar sweeteners. And I think the first important thing to say is they are completely safe. That's one of the key messages that we actually need to get across to people. Now, the way that sweeteners are monitored, first of all, we have something called the acceptable daily intake for each individual sweetener. And this is actually set at 100 times the level which is potentially thought to cause any harm. So 100 times more. So you'd need to be eating 100 times of the acceptable daily intake to get even close to the amount which is potentially thought to be negative, have a negative impact on health. Now, what that means in real terms, so if we take something like aspartame, and I'll talk more about aspartame in a moment and why we have this concern about it. Aspartame, it means that you would need to be having a person who weighs 75 kilos, because the acceptable daily intake is based on body weight. So somebody who weighs 75 kilos, so in old money, that's about 11 stone, for example, 11 to 12 stone. It means they would need to have between 9 and 14 cans of soda every day for their life. So the acceptable daily intake is a lifetime exposure. It's the amount that you would need to have every single day. So, that's just, of course, having 14 cans of soda every single day for your entire life is just not what's going to happen. And then you've got 100 times safety level on top of that.
What's funny about that statistic is I think when you look at 75 kilograms, I think it's around 40 milligrams per kilogram is what they say.
Up to 40 milligrams per kilo.
I often say when people come back at me on this topic is, a lot of these situations, the poison is in the dose. And a big problem is that when you're having, 14 plus, cans of any kind of drink, the actual water content in those drinks could be a lot more harmful to you than the actual non-sugar sweetener. So I think, I've been in hospital, I've worked in hospital for several years now, and, I've seen acute water intoxication. And, it happens at often levels far below 14 cans of anything, really. So I think it's just kind of funny where people are, scared about these, acceptable daily intakes, which already have a safety factor of 100 times in them, right? And they're using these kind of sensationalized headlines to create fear. And obviously the media loves a lovely clickbaity title or headline. So I think we're really facing an uphill battle right now to try and educate consumers on just the fact that they're safe, because people are losing, trust into just that statement itself. So I think, letting people know of what the actual acceptable daily intakes are, because they're so ridiculous over so many periods, so many years over the life course, I think just really puts things back into perspective a bit.
Yeah, and I think to remember also that these are considered to be, they're classified as food additives, and we have a huge amount of testing. And in fact, sweeteners are one of the most tested food additives that we actually have. And also because they're food additives and because we have this testing in process, we also have re-evaluation of the testing as well. So they're constantly
Yes.
reviewed to make sure that they continue to be safe. So they are safe, but let's just look at kind of like, let's take a bit of a step back in time and look at why we have, particularly with aspartame, we have this concern and worry. And one of the main concerns is linked to cancer. Now, this stems from research which was published by something called IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, an American organisation. And what they do is they look at the potential, I would guess, for products, things, anything to cause cancer. They've looked at hundreds of different things.
Yeah.
And then what they do is they group those things into four different categories. So you have group one at the top. These are things which are going to cause cancer, have the potential to cause cancer. So things in this group, for example, would be UV radiation, so sunlight, smoking, alcohol. Next, you have the group 2A, which probably cause cancer.
Yes.
So there's evidence to suggest that they will cause cancer. Things in this group, for example, hot drinks, surprisingly, but also red meat. Then you have your group 2B, and this is possibly could cause cancer, and this is where the level of the certainty of evidence is less.
Yes.
It's not conclusive, but possibly. Now, this is where aspartame was put back in the summer of 2023. So aspartame was classified in group 2B, so low certainty of evidence, possibly could cause cancer. And that's in with a whole range of things which we're familiar with. So talcum powder, for example. We have also in that group coconut oil. We also have aloe vera.
Aloe vera, yeah.
So we have lots of different things which we would be exposed to in life. And then at the bottom of the list, you have group 3, which doesn't cause cancer.
And I think what was previously in that group, it might not be anymore, but mobile phone usage.
Yes, I think the kind of like, I think it was the radiation that was emitted, something which we're very, very familiar with. But so this report came out in 2023 suggesting that aspartame could possibly cause cancer based on a low certainty of evidence. Now, very shortly after that, you've got to remember, this is what they call hazard, the hazard of something. What the more important thing is what is your risk?
Yes.
So the World Health Organization and the Food and Drink, the Food and Agriculture Organization from America then had their Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives research, which came out showing that actually the risk of aspartame was really, really quite low. And didn't change the guidelines. So the guidelines stayed up to a maximum of 40 milligrams per kilo of body weight for the acceptable daily intake. So whilst the hazard is that there's a potential for it to cause cancer, the risk of that based on current consumption by humans in the UK is really, really quite low. So this is where we got the confusion and, the fact that we had a massive, great media headline saying, aspartame causes cancer, potentially causes cancer, but actually the risk, and you, as I said before, you would need to be having up to 14 cans of soft drink with non-sugar sweeteners in them to actually, and 100 times more than that over a lifetime to actually get to that risk.
Yeah, so you brought up a fantastic point about hazard versus risk-based approaches to determining something's, cancer-causing potential, right? And this is something I get fed back a lot with an American and also UK-based audience, is that they say that, they allow certain things in America that they don't allow in Europe or the UK and vice versa. But we have to understand that these are just different approaches to determining whether something's harmful or not. So as you rightly said, the hazard-based approach is just something's ability to be able to cause cancer, right? And, if you look at most things, even caffeine or things that we generally think are, health promoting or normal, even water, like I just said, right? Water can also be toxic at a certain dosage. So I think people need to look at, what is the actual risk and how much would I need to be consuming to evaluate that risk, right? And that's exactly what JECFA, the Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives, does. And that's what I think that style of messaging is really important, taking the single component from IARC's classification and actually contextualizing it. Because I think a lot of people run away with what IARC say and don't actually remember or realize that JECFA are literally the designated expert committee on this specific topic. So if they're reaffirming the safety, then why are people just jumping on the bandwagon of IARC, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think the other thing we have to remember, we know when it comes to cancer risk, actually living with overweight or obesity is actually associated with, what is it, 13, 14, it changes frequently, 13 different types of cancer now.
I think between 100 to 400% increased risk for some of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we being overweight or living with obesity, that comes with a massive cancer risk for lots of different types of cancer. So we have to keep that in perspective whenever we talk about, you know, when we talk about health. And of course, the other thing is, it's not just about cancer. Good health isn't just about preventing cancer. It's about preventing many, many different, you know, and our mental health and well-being is really important as well, you know, and having something that we enjoy. Sweet taste is something that many people enjoy, and enjoyment is part and parcel of the process of having, you know, good well-being and good mental health.
Very good point. Actually, in my master's research study, I actually looked at the effect of different refined sugars and their link to depression, so worsening mental health outcomes. I did a literature review and a cohort study on that using the Twins UK cohort. And that's actually a very good point. You know, you could even make the argument that not only do they not cause cancer, but you could even say, when you're replacing sugars with non-sugar sweeteners, you might even be reducing your risk of cancer because of the indirect effects of managing obesity, potentially improving mental health outcomes because you're having less refined sugars. So I think you could even make the argument for the flip side. Not only are they neutral, but they could even be protective when they're being used to substitute full sugars. So I find that this whole conversation is slightly ironic, that people are scared over, super physiological amounts that you would need every single day, when actually for the average person who's got a sweet tooth, they could even be protective.
Yeah, and absolutely. The other thing is, good health tends to one good health practice tends to breed more good health practices. So if you're cutting down on sugar, then that might be going hand in hand. You're already starting to look after your health and your well-being. So you cut down on sugar by using a non-sugar sweetener. What else do you do? Maybe you're drinking more water as a result of it. Maybe you're having more fruit and vegetables in your diet. It's a snowball effect. You start off with one habit, and it's then really the kind of the gateway to changing your habits in lots of other different areas.
Yes, I know for myself, I would not be drinking as much water if I didn't have the low calorie, flavors to my water.
Yeah,
I know for a fact, because I just don't like the taste of water.
And many people say that. Many people. But as I said earlier on, we would love everyone to just be drinking water, but that's just not practical or realistic. And there are times when people want something which has got a sweet flavour.
This is a good talking point. I want to get onto this briefly. So obviously we live in an environment now where food manufacturers know how to formulate certain foods, patisseries, desserts, sweets, cakes, to make it really, really tasty, right? We add some sugar, we add some fat, we add a bit of salt, and just that concoction of ingredients makes it very hyper palatable. What the conversation in the media now surrounding these ultra processed foods is very kind of negative, as we all know. We've seen lots of, big names talk about it, write books about it. So what are your thoughts on the whole conversation surrounding ultra processed foods, and are they inherently bad for us?
I think it's like anything, it's about getting balance, isn't it? So we don't necessarily need to cut all ultra-processed foods out of our diet. Ultra-processed foods don't look at the nutritional, it looks at the processing angle of foods. It doesn't actually look at the nutritional value of foods. So you could arguably say you have a cake, which is shop bought, which might have some additional additives in it, but you also have a cake which is homemade. They're both high in fat, they're high in saturated fat, they're high in sugar. In fact, with the homemade version, you could argue the fact that you've got no nutrition information available, so you have no concept what you're actually having. It might taste good, so you have a bigger portion of it, so you've got less control. You've got really not much indication on portion control, whereas with shop bought. Now, that's not saying that we, of course, should be having shop bought cake over homemade. But the point is, you know, we don't have to cut out all ultra-processed foods from our diet. We can still incorporate them. But what we do need to do is, of all food, consider its nutritional value overall, and to really focus on following those healthy eating guidelines, which are to reduce, one of which is to reduce sugar, particularly the added forms of sugar, and to really sort of like coincide that with eating more fruit and vegetables, eating more whole grains, enjoying a more plant-forward way of eating, not necessarily having to cut out meat, for example, but having more plants, putting more plants in our diet, and really enjoying sweetness from a combination of fruits, for example, naturally sweet foods, and foods which may be traditionally have sweetened with sugar, and using sweeteners, non-sugar sweeteners where we can.
Well condensed and summarized. That was fantastic. I think that's a good place to wrap up there, as we'll be touching on ultra processed foods in later episodes. So thank you so much, Juliette.
Oh, you're so welcome. I really enjoyed it.
No, it's a fantastic conversation. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you.